Lots going on at CPAC over the weekend where President Donald Trump spoke, and there were some other interesting polling results and speeches that happened there. So here to discuss New York Times is Jane Coaston. She's host of The Argument. Excellent podcast. Highly recommend you guys all subscribe. Link will be down there in the description. Jane, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me in person.
Yeah, great friend of the show. It's been a long time. I think you were one of my my last realignment guests in person.
Yes.
One of the last people I actually saw in the flesh.
This is the first time I have ever seen you.
Yes.
So it's nice to know you exist in the real world.
I do exist in the meat space.
Yeah,
as a
in
human.
the meat space. That's a very Joe Rogan-esque term. So, Jane, we want to discuss with you what happened at CPAC. We were actually just discussing before the segment. Actually, let's put this question before we even do anything. Does CPAC matter? Like, why should we pay attention to what happened with CPAC? Is it just, the coalition of the faithful, the most faithful, the media building it up? What do you think?
CPAC is a performance, the same way any of these big conferences are performances. They are performance for a very specific audience. This is not just for people who are fans of the band. This is for people who are stans of the band. So, but what people are performing is important. And you see that where you see, Alex Berenson getting applause from the crowd for noticing that America hasn't reached 90% vaccination, which is something I think it's worth noting. If Donald Trump were still president, people would be very excited at CPAC if we reached 90%.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I think it's attempting to glom on the kind of anti-vaxxer or anti-vaxxer status onto a purely partisan decision point.
That's interesting.
But I think also it's worth noting that, this performance at CPAC and attempting to gain a name for yourself at CPAC, it is itself not very important. It will not change how people will perform in 2022 or 2024, which is, I think, very challenging for a lot of political reporters because you want something to do that's going to be something you could look back on in 2 years. And
be like, this was the canary in the coal mine.
Exactly. Yeah. It probably is, and it's probably just some canary. But CPAC, how people are performing and what they're saying at CPAC, when you have Glenn Beck showing off like a Klan hood, and then also a collection of Holocaust memorabilia off stage, which is a strange decision point. But again, this entire, the themes of the Democrats are the real party of slavery and this vaccine isn't trustworthy and you shouldn't trust the government, even though you trusted the government a year ago because Donald Trump was in charge of the government.
And Trump has talked about the vaccine a lot.
And Trump is the one under whom the vaccines were developed.
Exactly. This all happened. But I think CPAC, especially when a Democrat is in the White House, is always such an interesting event because it becomes very quickly come and take it, when just last year it was everything's amazing, the government is great, our only problem are Democrats. And I think that when you see this rapid switching back and forth, it's such a clearly partisan event that attempting to glean real importance from it, I think, is almost impossible. But again, what's being signaled matters here, and how that signaling is working.
Well, and to your point, I remember Rand Paul used to win the straw poll and stuff. Obviously, Rand Paul never ended up being president, and in fact, had relatively poor performance in his presidential campaign, all of that. So those are good caveats to keep in mind. One of the things that we've tracked here, and I know others have tracked as well, is that Joe Biden himself seems to not be a particularly good villain. Not the big applause lines. Did that continue to be the case at this CPAC where he wasn't the thing that was really animating the crowd?
Right. The thing that was animating the crowd were things almost entirely disconnected from Joe Biden. Because I think that when you think about what is an effective enemy to the GOP, it needs to be someone or something that seems purportedly more powerful than they are, and that they can pretend is more powerful than they are. Because I've been thinking a lot about right now we're kind of having these dueling victim narratives because it's the most it's the most powerful idea in politics to be I'm the victim of you. You're very powerful. You're Goliath. I'm David. Even when you're a governor or a senator and the person you're yelling about is some lady on Twitter or something like that. And so Joe Biden doesn't really fulfill that role because you would have to, the idea, and whenever I talk about this online, people are like, but that's just classic fascism to pretend that someone is both an idiot and an all-knowing genius. And I'm like, I don't think the people who are thinking this have worked quite that far into this. The reading that they're done, I'm going to argue is limited. But it is hard to say that, Sleepy Joe is also part of this giant cabal of secret geniuses who will destroy your life as soon as they get a chance.
I did see a couple of people try the Biden's America. It just didn't land at all. I thought it was pretty amazing. And to your point, actually, we have this video of Lauren Boebert of what she was talking about. And I do think it actually crystallizes kind of where some of the energy is. Let's take a listen.
We're here to tell government, we don't want your benefits. We don't want your welfare. Don't come knocking on my door with your Fauci outie. You leave us the hell alone.
So some Sarah Palin kind of wannabe vibes there.
Big time.
But, I mean, it's like this blend of Reagan libertarianism with, as you're saying, you know, this deep animation around the vaccine. And yet, people were pointing out this weekend, Trump also was trying to take credit for the vaccine in his press releases over the weekend. So it's like, well, where is it? Is this an area where, like, Trump is just dramatically out of step with his base? Or is it just pure, unadulterated culture war in that because Biden is in charge, a lot of people are just, you know, are just opposed to it for this reason. And look, that gets a lot of applause, so we shouldn't ignore it.
Yeah, and I regret to inform you, we've had this conversation many times, that kind of the, like, government for good and populist. I don't know how that's going right now.
Yeah, it's not going so well.
No,
and actually, you see that in the welfare in particular, because you're like, could have heard that speech in '96 and in '81. And
this is the kind of thing
it hasn't changed a lot.
Yeah, nothing has changed from that rhetoric. Though, again, because you know it is so clearly partisan. You know that at CPAC, if Donald Trump were still president, I am sure that you could have had a host of people from Orncast on down talking about how government can be for good and about how we need to lift up the working class that has been like demolished by the same housing restrictions you were just talking about, by a lot of these local and state issues. But you're not getting that. You're getting like, government's the problem, you know, the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. Like, it's very Reagan-esque. Right after we were just kind of told by conservatism writ large that they'd moved past Reagan and that this is a different time and the economy is different. And it turns out the economy is different. We are in a different time, but that same kind of rhetoric is incredibly effective when you have a Democrat in office, and especially when you have a party that exists, and I mean this, whenever I say this, I always want to be careful that I don't mean this as a negative or a positive, but when you have a party like the Republican Party that operates best as reaction, as a reactionary party.
That's true.
I mean that when the Democratic Party does something, the Republican Party says no.
Right.
And that's basically where they find their most effectiveness. And
they can almost win the presidency.
Yeah, you can almost,
exactly. Clear here.
And I think that, you know, you see that again when you go back to thousands of years ago, 2013, you have the efforts to overturn the Affordable Care Act, repeal and replace, repeal and replace, and then Republicans get control of government, and they're like, oh, this is way harder than we thought it would be.
And then they've spent 10 years building up, like, we're going to do it better, and then they're like, but we don't know how.
We don't know how. We got very busy during that 10 years. There was a lot happening. And so you see this tension happening, and I think that that's why you see so much. One of the most challenging things about American politics right now is that you have a lot of people who do have a lot of power in their own specific areas, but national politics and national power is a very different beast. And so you have a lot of governors, for example, Ron DeSantis, who, you know, passing this social media legislation that they are well aware of is going to die in court because of how that reacts to, you know, Section 230 and to surpassing law. But you have a lot of people who want that kind of national power, but they already have local power, but that's not quite enough. And so you see this idea of, I'm this incredibly powerful person, but I am putting myself in this position in which I appear to be less powerful because I'm reacting to national interests. I'm reacting to national powers. And I think it's really interesting because you see how, what people are using their power for and what they aren't using their power for.
Yeah.
People are using their power to send very strongly worded letters, but they're also using their power to, attempt to pass legislation that's going to die in court, and they know that.
Mm-hmm. All they care about is the discourse.
Right.
All they care about is like, how do I impact the national discourse and what sort of like attention can I draw to myself? And that's not a Republican Party specific thing.
No, it's a Republican and Democratic Party thing.
That's all politics is basically.
Yeah, which is, I think, if you are a person who values politics as a vehicle to get a thing done, it's incredibly depressing. Even just like, I've been thinking a lot. Chris Arnade wrote the fantastic book Dignity, and he's talked a lot about the people who don't vote, and we've had long conversations about that. And I was thinking about like if I were a person living on the margins and I didn't vote because I didn't feel represented, how offended I would feel if I were told repeatedly by politicians that like what voters care most about is this thing that I don't care about. Like what voters care most about is social media censorship. What voters care most about are these like specific issues that have to do with defunding the police. Like if you're a voter or a non-voter on the margins and you're thinking like, I can't afford rent, I don't know where my closest grocery store is, and I don't know how to get there and back, and my neighborhood is unsafe, but the cops just sit there and wait for someone to do something in front of them before they'll do anything, and if I call the cops, I don't know if they'll come. And it just like, it's extremely, as a person who's interested in politics, as a vehicle to do a thing and not just a vehicle to be on your show or have these conversations on the internet or in public or anywhere else, if you want politics to be about creating a society and fomenting that society, it's a very depressing time.
Let me say, first of all, I agree 100% with what you just said. But to play devil's advocate here and provide a counterpoint, Biden just signed these executive orders on antitrust, which we talked about here and covered, basically just going through what Matt Stoller has said about them. And one of the things that I did find really interesting is it was one area where there's potentially, if wielded in the right way and followed through, which is a gigantic if, could be truly transformational. And you had some Republicans, Chuck Grassley, also conservative groups like the Farm Bureau coming out and being like, yeah, we're actually for this. We're into this. What did you make of that development? You also, Marco Rubio has been in on the non-compete stuff. He's been, he's been into pushing to end at least non-competes in some contexts and settings. So what do you think of that development and how that fits into this narrative?
I think that it is, especially with regard to when you see people, and I disagree with a lot of people because I've had this conversation with Glenn Greenwald and others where if you have, and I think a lot of people would argue that if you have people of competing ideologies, but they come together and they find support for one particular solution that would make them both happy, and they're like, well, that's great, we've come together, we found this thing. I have a lot of questions about where people are coming from on these particular issues. And I'll give you an example. When we talk about Amazon or social media companies, for example, and you see a lot of criticism. But the criticism coming from Marco Rubio, for instance, if we go back, I think the last time I was on the show, we talked about Marco Rubio and pushing back on the unions. Where his issue, he had no problem with Amazon asking people to urinate in bottles. He had a big problem with the fact that Amazon might be mean to conservatives.
Was the woke HR department was the target of his ire.
Exactly. And so you definitely have a moment where you see that this wasn't a union issue for him. It was a culture war issue. And if Amazon was like, you know what? We're going to add Ryan T. Anderson to our board, and we're just going to we're going to repivot to this very whenever all your search results will come with like we benefit back the blue or something like that. But we're still going to mandate that our workers work 14-hour, 16-hour, 20-hour days and can be easily fired by text message. I think Marco Rubio would be like, okay, that's cool.
I mean, all but said as much. That's true.
And I think that that's something that comes as a concern to me. I think that we have this tendency that when people agree with us on a thing, that we're like, well, you must have come to the same ideological conclusions that I did. They probably didn't. And but it's okay if you have...
Doesn't matter if it ends with Chuck Grassley and Joe Biden and AOC being like, farmers should have a right to repair and we should break up the meatpacking monopoly.
I think it really depends because I think that in certain scenarios, I would say that like yeah, I think that would be great. But it is worth thinking about what the knock-on effects of such legislation will be. This is why I'm an extremely irritating person, because I'm always just like, okay, but what happens then? And what happens then?
Right.
I'm like every person in any horror movie. I'm the person who doesn't go in the basement. I never go in the basement. I'm
or
always
go
like,
into the woods at night.
Let's ask a lot of questions.
Sound?
Yeah. The sound is me leaving.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's something where I'm like, yes, these people coming together with these very divergent interests, but they want this similar thing. I'm curious what they each think the knock-on effects of that thing will be.
Right.
And clearly they see a political advantage in whatever those knock-on effects would be. And I am curious to see, like, how would those differ? Like, if you think that it would be a really good idea for this to happen because it'll benefit your political position, not necessarily benefit the world writ large. Because we all think our politics in some ways would benefit the world, but probably not.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I am very skeptical about when you see these different political groups coming together about a certain thing with a certain result. I'm curious to know what they each think the benefit to themselves will be.
Always appreciate
Which
your
is
perspective.
why we enjoy talking to you, because you're such an interesting thinker. Jane, tell people about your podcast, who you have on, plug your thing, where can they find you?
I'm at the New York Times. I host the podcast,
I've
The
heard of
Argument. Yeah. Contrary to popular belief, we're doing pretty okay.
Yeah. There's no argument
doing
there.
okay.
Although we did beat you recently, but it's okay. Thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah, I saw that. I checked. I look. It's a real Count of Monte Cristo. In 20 years, I'll have like dug up outside your apartment or something. I got you.
You got a long-term plan.
Right.
It's called The Argument. We have a lot of interesting conversations, including a lot of friends of the show.
Yeah.
Matt Taibbi.
That's right.
We argued lengthily, and we'll probably do it again. This week's episode is about Biden receiving communion. It's very Catholic-centered, if you're into that kind of thing.
Okay.
But we have a lot of interesting conversations. Sometimes it's really fun. Sometimes it's really hard, but that's, I think, the most useful conversations to have.
I personally really
Totally
enjoyed
agree.
that episode you had with Michael Brendan Dougherty. So
Yeah.
I recommend people go listen to that one. We really love having you, Jane. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
so much
coming in,
for
Jane.
having
Great to
me.
see you.
You're very welcome. And to everybody else who is out there, thank you all for watching or listening. You become a premium subscriber today. Get to get the show 1 hour early. Breaking Points Premium. It's all down there in the description notes and screen. You guys know the drill. We love you, and we will see you all tomorrow.
I thought you were going to say something else there.
Oh.
I thought you were going to say, like, you get a shit ton of benefits.
No.
You try not to curse on the show.
I try.
Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.